Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the A to Z English podcast. I'm John, and today we're going to take the next step from where we left off in our previous episode. If you've tuned in before, you know we've been talking about how to master specialized English in your chosen fields. Today's episode is all about how to apply that knowledge in real-life scenarios, whether in your career or day-to-day conversations.
Hi everyone, Sarah here. We're excited to dive deeper into this topic. We know it can be challenging to go from learning vocabulary and phrases to using them in the right context. But today we'll give you practical advice on how to seamlessly incorporate specialized English into your communication. So if you've ever wondered how to take what you've learned and confidently use it, you're in the right place.
Exactly, Sarah. This episode will cover 3 key areas: using specialized English in professional settings, enhancing your language skills with context, and how to keep improving through targeted practice. Stick around for useful tips and examples. 1. Applying specialized English in professional settings. Let's start with the professional world. Once you've learned industry-specific terminology, how do you bring that into meetings, presentations, or even emails?
Great question. The first thing to consider is the purpose of your communication. For example, if you're presenting in a meeting, the language you use should be clear and tailored to your audience. Are they experts in your field, or are you speaking to a general audience?
Right. The level of detail and jargon you use will depend on who you're talking to. In a meeting with fellow experts, feel free to use specialized terms. But if your audience isn't as familiar with the topic, try explaining complex concepts in simpler terms.
It's a balancing act. You don't want to sound too technical and alienate people, but at the same time, you want to showcase your expertise. One technique is to introduce the specialized term and then provide a brief explanation. For example, the algorithm we're using is designed to optimize user engagement. Essentially, it helps users find the content they're most interested in.
Another tip is to practice your transitions. Moving from general English to more specialized language should feel natural. If you're giving a presentation, write out key points in advance and practice how you'll introduce industry-specific concepts without overwhelming your audience.
2. Enhancing language skills with context. Now, let's talk about the importance of context. When learning specialized English, understanding the words alone isn't enough. You need to know how they're used in real situations. For instance, in the medical field, the word diagnosis might seem straightforward, but the way it's used in a clinical discussion can be very different.
Exactly. This is where contextual learning becomes key. One of the best ways to enhance your understanding is by immersing yourself in materials from your field. Watching industry-related videos, reading articles, or listening to podcasts. This way, you're not only learning the words, but seeing how they fit into the larger picture.
Yes, and pay attention to how professionals in your field speak. What phrases do they use? How do they structure their sentences? The more you expose yourself to this language in context, the more natural it will become for you to use it yourself.
Another tip is to focus on how these terms are used in different contexts. For example, the word scalable in business might refer to a system or model that can grow. But in a technical discussion, it could refer to a piece of software that can handle increasing workloads. By understanding these nuances, you'll be able to communicate more effectively in specialized settings. 3. Using specialized English in everyday conversations. Now, let's switch gears a bit. While most of our discussion has been about professional settings, specialized English can also come up in everyday conversations.
Absolutely. Think about it. If you're chatting with a friend who's in the same field, you might naturally start using industry jargon. Or if you're explaining your job to someone, you'll need to find a way to describe what you do in a more accessible way.
A useful strategy here is code switching, which means adjusting your language depending on your audience. When speaking to colleagues, you might say, "The user interface needs to be more intuitive." But with a non-technical friend, you could say, "We're making the website easier to use."
And don't forget about opportunities to practice. Even in casual conversations, you can find ways to integrate the specialized English you've learned. The more you practice in low-pressure settings, the more confident you'll feel using it when it really counts.
4. Targeted practice for continued improvement. Our last section today is all about practice. To really master specialized English, targeted practice is essential. What do we mean by that, Sarah?
Targeted practice means focusing on the areas that will have the biggest impact. If you're in marketing, for example, you might focus on improving your presentation skills and learning phrases like market segmentation or brand positioning. On the other hand, if you're a software developer, you might concentrate on explaining technical concepts in layman's terms.
Right. Tailor your practice to your goals. One great method is role-playing. Find a partner and practice having a professional conversation. Maybe even simulate a job interview where you discuss your field in depth.
And don't forget to vary your practice. Focus on listening, speaking, reading, and writing. If you're a designer, you could watch a design tutorial and take notes on the terminology used. Then, try explaining the same process to someone else using the new terms you've learned.
That's an excellent point. Practice doesn't have to be boring or repetitive. Make it relevant to your interests, and it will become more engaging and, ultimately, more effective. Conclusion. That brings us to the end of today's episode. We've discussed how to apply specialized English in both professional and everyday contexts, the importance of learning with context, and the value of targeted practice.
As always, the key is consistency. The more you expose yourself to specialized English in real situations, the more comfortable you'll become. Keep practicing, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every conversation is a chance to learn.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the A to Z English podcast. We'll see you next time with more tips and strategies to help you become fluent in English. Until then, keep learning and stay confident.